Hi guys, welcome to the third session of this course. So we're looking at interior sketching or drawing, making studies from an interior, which is a great project if you're stuck indoors. So this week we're going to be roughly sort of following on in a way from what we did last week. So last week we put in all these kind of like basic tones just to start to establish some massing of tone. The first week we did a sort of line sketch, which was the sort of skeleton of the image. And this week we're going to be sort of carrying on, but starting to kind of deepen and push some of these tones where necessary. So sort of flattening and darkening out some of the shadows, the parts of the drawing that we know go really dark. I've not got the reference up directly on the video, but you can click the link in the YouTube description, on the description on YouTube, to get a link to the reference, and you can sort of see what I'm doing. This way you get a slightly bigger, better look at my work as I'm drawing. So what I'm going to begin with is just sort of showing you how to push a tone using a mechanical pencil, or you could use a very sharp sort of hand sharpened pencil. This is about a B, and we're going to be looking at trying to deepen tones in pencil without making it too shiny. So one issue with graphite is that if you really kind of drive the graphite into the paper, it sort of forces the grain of the paper flat, and graphite is naturally quite a shiny medium, so then you get this sort of reflection, and it can sort of detract a bit at times from the image if you end up with that really heavily darkened graphite. So we want to look at how we can build the tone in an area of a drawing to be darker without pressing down the paper. So a little bit of a sort of technical start to this lesson, and then we're going to apply that approach to start to get really dark with some of these parts of the drawing that needs to go really dark. So I'm going to zoom in slightly. I'm going to work on, this is a little computer screen in the scene. So I'm just going to sharpen my focus a bit there. You can see, so when I zoom in there, actually, you can sort of see, sorry it's wobbling around a bit because it's so zoomed in, you can see from a distance it kind of merges together, but I'll put my pencil here so you can see it a bit closer. Actually I'll just zoom into about here because it's not letting me lock in completely. It stays there for a little bit, so we'll have a look at it. But if I put my pencil there, you can sort of see, so that's the zoomed in, that's how sort of blunt my pencil is, and you can see that I've worked over the top of the surface of the paper, and it's left those that sort of patchiness or a sort of texture, because what happens is my pencil lead, you can sort of see, is that thick, and the grain of the paper is going to be a certain sort of texture. You get broader grains in paper where they're very sort of very deep kind of rifts, valleys in the paper, and you get smoother paper like Bristol paper. Bristol board is a very smooth paper. The advantage of paper that has quite sort of heavy grain, this is probably a medium grained paper, medium to sort of quite fine paper, it has a little bit more sort of robustness, so it's not as prone to doing that sort of effect of smoothing out and going really shiny, whereas something like Bristol board sort of goes quite shiny quite quickly. You can work that to your advantage. Every paper has advantages. So this sort of paper is quite good for working. This is Canson Metientes, which I mentioned in the first video. And it's a good sort of all-rounder for charcoal and graphite and dry media generally, pastel. Yeah, so anyway, what you basically need to do is, so we sort of looked at the grain a little bit close up there, and we saw that when I was first kind of flicking over with, particularly with that bigger pencil I used in the previous session, I only hit the sort of top of the texture of the paper, the top of the grain, and my pencil didn't get into the gaps between. If I was to go in really heavily, like I say, and just kind of press all of the grain down, it's going to go dark, but it'll go shiny. So the only alternative, when using the point, there are other ways that you can do this. You could do this with a brush or a stomp, but it is possible to do it with a point, and that's what we're going to look at today. The alternative is to work my way, not pressing hard, so this is quite key. You can see I'm not holding the pencil too close up, I'm holding it back there. And I'm just kind of working my way around this screen. I'm not too fussed about the edge being really sharp just yet. The edge can be sort of fuzzy. We're going to work on edges later in the drawing. And I'm just taking my time changing the angle of the pencil and rotating the pencil around in my hand, that's a really key thing. If I rotate the pencil around in my hand and I work it at this kind of angle to the paper, it means that the pencil's always moderately sharp, because it's almost as though I'm sharpening it as I'm adding tone. So it's a moderately slow process, but it means you're always in control. So I want to push this is a kind of really dark computer screen, it's off. It's going to be one of the darker tones in the whole drawing, so I'm using this as a sort of way to establish how dark my tones are going to go, and also kind of get into the swing of darkening my graphite drawing in this way. But at no point do I want to push down so hard that I start to kind of flatten the paper. So I'm just constantly swiveling around. The angle of my pencil. So you can see it's just gradually getting darker. I always think you sort of sacrifice, you either kind of can spend quite a while gradually building up a drawing and sort of doing it in this measured way, or you can work a bit quicker and you maybe have a little bit less control if you're working quickly, so it's sort of up to you. Certainly the sort of point of this exercise is where we're just gradually building the tones up in this drawing, so we're not going to end up with anything too sharp or crisp or kind of definite. Everything's going to be more mass based and more fuzzy. So even though we're using the point of this pencil, we're focusing on these masses of tone. I'm getting close to being reasonably happy now with that screen, that tone. It might push a little bit darker later, but I think for now I'm going to leave it at that and move on to the little keyboard below, which I'm going to do in the same fashion, and also the stand that it sits on. So that's not actually totally fleshed in yet, but it's a good opportunity to kind of pop it in. And we've also got on this keyboard a little bit of a kind of a shadow that emerges on it, so the front right corner of it is a little bit lighter because there's a sort of shadow cast by the screen above onto the keyboard. So I'm just working the tone, or developing the tone in the same way. That's pretty good. I can do the same thing now with this box. And then pretty much anywhere in the drawing that I know goes almost as dark as this screen. So I've got these little stack of books. And I'm not going sort of super detailed yet into them. Still working with kind of larger, more general masses. If I zoom out a bit, you can sort of see how that's started to sort of even out that tone of the screen. And darken it at the same time. And I now want to work down sort of into this table as well. So we're just using that same approach, swiveling the pencil all the time in my fingers. I find that's a really key thing for being able to work and keep your tone your pencil sharp, so you always have a nice sharp pencil to work with, and just not having to sharpen as much, because people are always a bit reluctant to sharpen, and if you don't sharpen, it makes it a lot harder to sort of shade in this manner. Now the rest of the front of this table is also going to go reasonably dark, but I'm just sort of starting with the really dark shadow below it, because it's sort of like the front plane of the wood has some reflected light, so it doesn't go quite as dark as the other bits around it. So all of this stuff underneath goes pretty dark. So I'm just going to focus this session on just this, probably pretty much this corner of the image, because we're already about 18 minutes through, and I like to keep them to about kind of a bit over 20 minutes maximum, so they're nice and digestible. But you should hopefully get an idea of the process. And what I'll do for our next session during the week, I'm going to basically carry on this process across the rest of the image, just up to about the level of detail that we're hitting in this left-hand corner, and then I'll start the next video with a little quick time lapse, just showing sort of how I did the rest of the drawing, and it's just going to be the same as this, so you'll be able to watch the time lapse and sort of see the process unfold in the same way. I don't like to omit any of the process, because I think it's important for you guys to be able to see exactly what's going on, or exactly how all the different parts kind of happen and come together. But equally, I don't want you to have to watch endless kind of shading in. But it's worth spending a bit of time in this session just kind of looking at the process slowed down a little bit, and I've gone over it, sort of also the thinking behind the process. And generally I sort of advocate always referring a lot to the reference, but in this case, because we're sort of going for a simplification, a sort of smooth simplification, it's not too important that you get tons of detail. You can sort of observe the reference, try to distill what you want to get out of it, and then sort of shade based around that. So yeah, I'll go just a little bit darker in under this table. That's pretty good. And then I'm going to darken the front of the table, but I'm not going to darken the front of the table quite as much as the tone below it, and it won't be quite as dark as the screen that I was working on at the beginning as well. And I don't mind it being too fuzzy, like I said. Any of these kind of points where tones are meeting can be fuzzy. We're going to go in and sharpen. Sort of adding detail and sharpening will be a stage, sort of later stage of the drawing. This sort of method of shading as well can actually be used for biro work, which may surprise some people, but you sometimes see very detailed biro drawings, and you can actually apply biro in a pretty gradual way, even though it's a pen and we tend to associate pen and ink with kind of darker, more contrasty, direct application. Biro does actually lend itself to be used in a fairly soft manner, which can be quite nice. And the final thing I'm going to do is just work a little bit on this tabletop. And look for these, slightly darkening the cast shadow on the tabletop, which sort of follows from that shadow that's cast onto the keyboard as well. You know, it's a typewriter there, but it's not quite as old as a typewriter. And again, this tabletop's not going to be as dark as the front of the table, so we're always using kind of relative tones. We can sort of, once we get more and more tones in, we can then start to sort of relate them. And you can see that, you know, from a distance now, it didn't necessarily read super well, super effectively up close, because we're going to keep getting smoother and then it'll work better up close. You can sort of see how it's working. And actually, I mean, I should really go a little bit darker behind this chair at this stage, because it's beyond the bits of it that are kind of catching reflective light. They go generally goes a little bit darker, but I won't go completely into that. It's a slightly more complex detailed thing that we'll be focusing on more in later sessions. But I can sort of think, I know that the sort of back of the chair is transparent essentially, because it's got these little arms that reach up, but we can see a lot of the background below, so if I know what's going on in that background, it's worth sort of darkening a bit earlier. So yeah, I'm going to call it a day at this stage, so you can sort of see how that's developed. A bit of a focus there, and then it should pop back out. Give you guys a slightly better look of the whole image. Yeah, you can see how it's developing. It's quite a big change from last week, so I'm gonna, as I say, this sort of approach I'll work on through the rest of the drawing next week. I'll think about that actually, because what I might do, what might be interesting actually as an extension would be to work on this area here that has a lot of stuff going on with light, and then maybe after that, the sort of session after the next session, I'll have a bit of a time lapse of what's going on here, and then we'll jump back into detail in the rest of it. If you do find I'm kind of not entirely sure about the shape of this chair, it's actually caused me trouble through most of the drawing. You can always, this is not a bad time to kind of go in and correct stuff as well, and if you are correcting, you just obviously use your little kneadable eraser, and you can see it's not too hard the way that I've sketched all of it in. It's not too hard to erase and change. But we'll be doing a lot of that kind of fiddling and erasing later on in the drawing. For now, we're just trying to block all these general tones in as best we can. But certainly, it's come a long sort of way, come along a lot this session, which is good. You can go in, and if you need to fiddle with stuff, just use your eraser and sketch it back over. But yeah, we'll be doing a lot of those sorts of corrections down the track. But you get the idea. You can sort of start to feel like the light's already sort of functioning a bit. Like the light cast here is now sort of performing a use on the table, or it makes sense what's happening on the table, where this cast shadow lies. So yeah, that's it for this week. As always, you should subscribe to the YouTube to get access to, well, to be updated about all the new videos that are coming up from both myself and the rest of the faculty, and there's lots of interesting interviews and those sorts of things, artist spotlights. You can go through to the OCAD page as well if you want to sign up for support while you work through all these projects. Have a look at that. But yeah, otherwise I'll see you guys soon.